Very cool. Today I really just want to kind of kick off like a kind of a pairing shaped day with just a little bit of review to make sure that like we're kind of all up to speed on the basics, not just of like um, doing the Sinatra stuff, but understanding like what's being asked of us as we do Sinatra stuff. Like how do we read like our tests? We haven't really talked too much about like how a capybara test works formally, but I think that it's super helpful to like as you have a if you have a tested lab to be able to kind of get into that, and this is going to apply for Rails stuff next week as well. So I think that what I'd like to do is get into this Sinatra AR CRUD lab and kind of just do like a live code of it and talk through some of the things that I think of as I'm going through a lab like this, and then also take any questions as we go. If anybody wants to like zoom in a little bit further to one specific part of things. So I've got it cloned down now. I haven't bundled yet. Go ahead and bundle. I'm just going to get things started and get to a place that I can like run our spec tests and then maybe use that as our jumping off point for getting into the app. So can I say rake db create, or am I going to get an error back? Sometimes I get an error right here. Yeah, so when I get the adapter not specified error, I've run into this situation so many times that I have a new workflow for it. I just do a copy from the desktop. I have a database.yaml file, and then I can just drop that into config slash database.yaml. So this will make a copy of the file at the first argument into the second argument path. So this should give me a database.yaml file now in my app, and now I think that creation should be okay. Fantastic. Always a good feeling when you find a way to like shorten your own feedback loop, and I found that just having the file that I always need on the desktop and doing a terminal copy command, less focus switching. Anyways, I've created a database. Let's do some RSpec. I'm not sure if I have the learn gem installed. If not, I just do like straight up RSpec because I'm like old school. Yeah, so I'm gonna say let's see, ls this. We do have a spec folder, so I'm gonna say RSpec. It says migrations are pending. So it says migrations are pending, and maybe I look at my code to double check on this. This is a thing that I've seen a lot of people do and ask questions about, so I think probably good to take 2 minutes to talk through it. I've got a migration here where an article needs to be created with title and content. I have a schema.rb. The schema.rb matches, right? Like this ends in 201114. And the schema.rb also ends in 201114. That leads me to believe that like this migration's already run. Like if I run rakedb migrate, I wouldn't expect it to do anything necessarily because I already have the schema. But now, like, hang on, this is even more confusing. So let's break it down. The schema.rb file is generated, right? So some instructor, when they were building this curriculum and like setting up the files, ran the schema to test it. And that's why the schema version was set this way. But this file was given to us the last time that rakedb migrate was written. So like, for example, if like you had no schema.rb file, there's a rake task that will dump this file out, right? It's just generated. So it's possible to take a project that has no database, that has no migrations run, that still has one of these files left over in it from the last time that somebody had run migrations in the app. So basically, like now I'm able, cool, I was able to run a migration. I saw that something changed. So then I run RSpec again, kind of expecting that maybe now my tests will work. But we still run into this issue. Migrations are pending. To resolve this issue, run rakedb migrate Sinatra env test. So I need like a test database here specifically, and Sinatra env is the place where we store the keyword of what type of database we actually are talking to. So if Sinatra env is test, any sort of task that we do in the terminal is going to apply to a test.SQLite or a test.db. And otherwise, the default environment will be development. This lets us have one database that we put like information in that we want to test and play around with as we build our app as our development database. And then we have another database that we only ever put like 3 or 4 objects in at a time just to test a couple relationships or a couple of features. And we're always clearing out the database in between tests to keep lookups nice and fast. And we don't want that database to get huge. So like there's barely anything in there. And we wouldn't want that to interfere with our development work. So we have 2 different databases. This is just the way that we navigate between which ones we're talking to. So now that I've done the DB migration in the test environment, when we run our spec tests, in spec helper here, the first thing that happens when spec helper loads is we call this Sinatra env equals test. This sets the environment variable every single time we run our spec to the test string. That means we're never going to look at our development database in this environment, and this is how it's happening. So then anytime that we want to do stuff, right, like article.create needs a database there. That's why we had this error before, right? We needed to have migrations run on the test database so that we could save objects into the test database, defined by the fact that every spec file requires the spec helper, and the spec helper puts us into the test environment. So before we even dive in, we've already kind of talked a little bit about some things around like configuring an application and environments, development versus test, why we have to run migrations 2 times, one for each database. Do we have any questions on that element of stuff before we move on?
Someone said no.
Cool, that's fine. I'll wait the full 7 seconds. That's something I'm working on in 2020 to push against my own innate introvert or extroversion or outgoing introversion or whatever it is. Yeah.
Is before could you go over I'm not quite following you on why you need to set
I didn't catch that.
He wants to know why you have to set the environment variable to test.
yeah.
Sure. So let's, for another example here, I think it's in config environment if I remember correctly. So normally when we do stuff, right, we require this config environment file, and this is the file that canonically brings everything together. Sorry, let me pause. The question that was asked is like, why do we have this Sinatra env equals test sometimes? Why do we have this notion of Sinatra env? And basically Sinatra env is an environment variable. An environment variable is read by the application at various times when it starts up and runs to determine how that application should run that particular time. So one thing that we've decided to store in an environment variable called Sinatra env is a string indicating the type of database that we're going to be working with as we work with our project. So we could have the exact same code designed to run apps and features the exact same way, but sometimes what we do with the data has a different intention behind it. Sometimes I don't really care about saving data. I just want to test data. So for example, this challenge has a test that wants to make sure that we're able to create an article, right? And in order to create an article and test it, it first makes 2 articles and uses .create to put them in the database. And then here, it attempts to click on a form after filling in an article's title and content. We'll talk a little bit more about this capybara syntax as we go. But essentially, this capybara test is attempting by clicking on submit after filling in these 2 fields to create a 3rd article. And so it's going to check that article.all.count equals 3. Now, if we didn't have 2 databases, I'd have to rewrite this test every single time I went to test my own app as a developer and added an article to the database. If I'm using the app as a developer and I use it to create 10 different articles, I'd have to be aware that I don't just have 2 articles in here. I have 2 articles plus the 10 from when I'm developing code. And that's just way too much to maintain, right? So it's much nicer to be able to say like, okay, whenever I'm running tests, will require spec helper. Spec helper's job is to say, let's only do things in the test database for this. And whenever I'm doing like a shotgun and running the whole application, right, as a coder who's out here like looking in the browser to see what's happening, then I'll set my environment to development. And when we look at our config environment.rb a little bit further, right here, when we establish a connection to the database, we use this Sinatra env value to determine which .SQLite database file we'll literally be accessing. So one quick way to think about this could be that Sinatra env is basically an alias for the file name of the database that we'll be accessing when we use the code. And we have 2 different databases because sometimes we want to have extremely explicit control over every single object that's in the database so that we can make test level predictions that can like be kind of firm. And other times we want to be a lot more free to put things into an application and see like how making a form change like affects what happens in the code, and that might require us to like list a bunch of other stuff when we're done and really see how the app looks on the screen. And so we'd want to have more than just a couple of objects in a database, and we'd expect them to stick around over time. Does that answer your question? Awesome. Cool. The tricky part, honestly, as you're coding, is that most of the time I think that we just assume that we're in development because we're developers all the time, and it was hard for me to think about testing as its own separate data store. I think that's what really helped me the most was thinking about tests in terms of data being tested and then recognizing that I didn't want to mix up data being tested with data that I was just playing around with in the browser. And that helps me to remember like kind of conceptually why somebody would have two databases. And then when I have that in my mind, then it's just a matter of like, okay, how do I use syntax to switch between the two? But for me, the biggest hurdle was always like, why are there two databases? I'm only writing one app. You could even imagine a third database though, right? We could have a third database called production that when this app actually was like on the market and we were saving real users information, we wouldn't want them to go on the site and see like my like John Smith, like 555 user that's not connected to anything real, or all of my fake like Invader Zim characters that I insert into an app. It would be unprofessional in certain contexts. So yeah, a lot of times you have a test, a development, and a production database over the life of a professional application. Cool. So let's see here. Oh yeah, let's review some Sinatra. No, I'm not going to save the changes I made to the celebration tab. I also have a celebration thing happening up here, by the way. There's a Cowsay gem, and I think that everybody should install Cowsay so that they can use Cowsay. It's just a personal opinion. In any case, okay, so we've done migrations. We've got tests like kind of ready to run. I'm going to run RSpec. We have a bunch of failures. Here's the thing, like it was hard enough for me to look at multiple test failures when I was just in like one or three files, right? Now that we have like an entire suite of files where the problem could be in a model, it could be in a view, it could be in a controller, it could be in like a syntax thing, it could be in a logic thing. Maybe I've got the wrong thing set up. Maybe I hit the wrong key in the test file itself when I was like browsing through it. I'm going to do a fail fast on this. Just one at a time. Cool. So our one failure. Okay, so we're getting an error, and it says the error is under creates a new article. So when I'm doing something like this, if I start by running a test, I think that I might have already made a little bit of a mistake. I think that maybe it would have been better for me to start like in this README, kind of like looking through and grazing through what's ahead. So first I'll need to create an articles table, set up a model, then we'll need to set up the ability to create an article. Then we're going to need to handle show and index actions. Then we're going to need to figure out how to do the edit controller action in view. And then we'll also need to do delete stuff. Okay, so now I feel like I have a flyby understanding of what's asked of me. We're basically going to do all the CRUD things in this application, right? So this first error is about creating a new article. And I think that sometimes here, like, the other habit that people get into is only looking at the test, like, realizing like, okay, I could get this specific, or hey, I could get this specific, and then I could go into the capybara file itself, right? I could go to the where is it at? AR CRUD lab spec line 17. It's an art to be able to go through a stack trace and make yourself ignore all of like the RVM gem stuff, right? These are all things that somebody else gave me that were downloaded that I can't touch. Only these three lines where it's AR CRUD lab spec and spec helper, these two, and then this third one down here, those are the only ones that my eye really wants to go look for, because those are places that I've like touched code, or that the code is touching my application in a way that I can go and anticipate it directly. So I'm looking for my own spec file. I can see on line 17 how it's running. So for me to understand capybara a little bit, I need to look into like some of these keywords. Capybara is very similar to RSpec. RSpec gave us words like describe and let and before, and also gave us like this it, right? RSpec gave us expect and to include. Those are all like native to the RSpec gem. It's a domain specific language for testing Ruby, right? So we have these domain specific words that it gives us. Capybara is a gem that is domain specific, even more specific. It's domain specific to testing Ruby code that builds web applications. And Capybara basically spins up a virtual browser, like in pure code, by looking at things like where is an HTML form want to go to. And then it's able to go and make requests to given controllers and act like a user, making those requests via a browser. And accordingly, the language that Capybara uses is very similar to how I would give a human being instructions for how to test my own page if I wanted a human to test it. So in this first test, visit articles new is not breaking. But line 17, fill in title with my favorite article is breaking. Visit, by the way, is just a way to say make a GET request to the following URL, right? So if I wanted to see what happens when I make a GET request to articles new, I could travel to the controller and check that out. And so far I only see like an application controller. So I don't actually see articles new. I'm confused about why articles new wouldn't be giving me the error, right? Not the spec helper, not the readme, not the environment. I'm just going to try to clean my room up a little bit here. Here we go. So it doesn't really bug me so much that like fill in title with my favorite article is not working, because I have a deeper question, which is namely, I don't have a view for new article, right? I don't have a controller route for articles new. So it kind of bugs me because I've been practicing working in Sinatra. I would expect that like I'd be seeing like a Sinatra doesn't know this ditty or something like that maybe when I went to the page. And that's when I stop and I realize that all I've done so far in this app that's about building a web application is read and write code and look at tests, right? That's a problem already. And so the very first thing that I'd like to do is like get a shotgun going so I can see the exact state of my application in more ways than just reading test output. Basically, as a programmer, I'm trying to let the code tell me everything that it can tell me, and a test can tell me like if an error that somebody was planning to find is there, but it's not going to tell me a ton of other stuff, right? Like if something is in a weird place on the page that a real user would never see it. A test won't tell you that. A test won't tell you some other esoteric things too. So it's really important to like not just, if you have a test for Sinatra, a test suite for a Sinatra lab or for a Rails lab, don't just use the tests as your crutch, like also use the browser and make sure that you're really developing this and playing with the app as you go. So yeah, on my right, I'm going to have a rate console tab. Over here, I'm going to have my shotgun tab as I do. Cool. We'll go to 9393 and see what's up. Localhost 9393. Now they said visit articles new, right? I think part of my job when I'm looking at this test stuff is that if Capybara is going to do something, I want to do the exact same thing that Capybara did, at least until I get comfortable enough reading the syntax that I can like anticipate what Capybara is doing. So I'm going to visit articles new for real. /articles/new. It is a Sinatra doesn't know this ditty. So the thing is that like Sinatra knows how to give us an error screen. So this error screen is still a screen that you're able to visit, right? The response that I get as a user isn't what I actually want, but Capybara has no problem with that. Of course, Capybara does have a problem with the next step because fill in is a keyword that looks for form inputs to fill in. And this page is only like text and a picture, so it doesn't have any form things to fill in. We should make a controller action for articles new, and then we should link it to a new form that has things that we can fill in. So I'm going to go about doing that now that I feel kind of confident where I am in my code. Before I start actually like coding, does anybody have any questions on like my thought process right there, or why I would want to like code in a browser as well as looking at my learn? Cool. I heard an eraser hit a table and what sounded like a grunt. So I'm going to assume there are no questions at the moment. I'm going to go ahead and make an articles new route. It's going to be a get because that's what visiting means. Articles/new. Do I need to make a brand new article yet? Nah. Do I need to render an ERB? I will. What will the ERB need to be called? In this case, we're just talking about one model. This is like really more about making sure that controllers and views talk together well. So this is one of those labs that's nice and simple. We don't have a lot of subfoldering going on. So I'm just going to like put everything just straight up in the views folder for now. I'm going to say ERB new. Later on, if the project grew and I had more objects involved, I'd probably create the subfolders and create different named controllers at that point, but I see no reason to create that extra work if I only have one object that's the focus of my application. Obviously, in the projects for this mod, they're going to be more complex and we will have subfolders. But for now, let's make a form. Question?
Yeah, sorry. I know you said we were going to make subfolders for this, but some of else do have it. Can you talk about how the syntax looks for?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, let's do that for sure. No, why not? Let's do maybe we can even do a controller refactor later on if the case warrants. But I'll make a subfolder now. We'll do a new folder. I'm going to call it articles. So by convention, like our views, we should use the plural name because it's the same as like our route name, and we don't want to have to like remember that sometimes it's different. I think the only time it's really going to be singular is in the class definition, right? Or when we're talking about a single instance as a variable. So now I can like slide new into articles. And now our test can be like, if we can see something on this page, right, then we'll be able to know that we got there. So even before I fill in anything on a form, I'm just going to say like, yay, we made it. Yeah, let's try this out. So if I go to articles new, do we have a do not know this ditty? We don't have a do not know this ditty, but it does say no such file or directory. It's looking in app views new.erb. Okay, well, let's try something else. Let's go back in the controller, and let's say it's not just in new, it's in articles new. Articles/new. We refresh. Oh, it's even worse. Undefined local variable or method new for application controller. So look at how this gets colored. I'm not sure if you can see it here, but it starts out kind of orangish. And then it kind of gets that nice like old bar lime green. So the problem here is that a symbol can't really contain a slash character, but ERB takes a symbol as an argument. What I could do is express this as a string. Could try that out. Refresh. Oh dear. Well, here's a problem, that if I say ERB articles new, I just pass in a string to ERB, the string becomes the return value. So ERB needs to take a symbol. What if I call .toSymbol on this string? That does it. So if you pass in a symbol of a string path, right, then that will go. So the tricky thing is that it can only take a symbol, but the symbol needs to contain like the slash, and we can't just write that as a pure symbol. We have to make a string with the slash and then convert it to a symbol. Luckily, Ruby gives us a nice shorthand for this. You might have seen, by the way, like in JavaScript where somebody does something like this. They put a plus right before a number that's a string, and then the plus sign like converts it into the number 5. I think it does. Hang on, let me just play for one quick second. This is a JavaScript console. If I just say number 5, that's the number 5. If I say plus, then the number 5. That, yeah. The plus coerces a string into an integer in JavaScript when you put it right before the string. Similarly, in Ruby, we can do this thing where we put a colon before a string, and that, you see how it colors it like the other symbols? That coerced the whole string into a symbol there. So this will also work if I refresh the page. We do, and it does. Does that answer your question about the question was about what syntax do we use to get into nested folders? Did that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. So yeah, we'll keep it in the folder here. And then, so we're at articles new, and remembering what we are trying to do exactly, we're at fill in title with my favorite article. So the fill in keyword in Capybara, and I sent a link out about this yesterday, fill in responds to a couple of different things. It'll respond to the name attribute of a form input. It'll also respond to the ID attribute of a form input. I think that we should probably put IDs on all of our inputs so that Capybara knows how to find stuff. That gives us the freedom to like use the name attribute the way that we want to. If we want to, like, for example, use that nesting syntax to nest our params under the article namespace, that would let us do that. So what I'm talking about here when we say fill in title is that we'll have like an input, and the input, if it has an ID of title, this should give us a success instead of a failure. If I say type text, that should be something that can be filled in. Sure. I want to talk about like what Capybara is looking for. So like right now, I'm not even going to like flesh out the form any more than this. I'm just going to run rspec again and see if we get the exact same error that we got last time. Rspec. It should still fail on the same test, right? But check it out. Now it has a problem with the field content. Now it has a problem on line 18, right? We've moved past the problem on line 17 because we've created an input that has the ID of title. That's all that Capybara needs to go and find that input. And that's great, because now that I've written this minimum amount of code required to get past that, I'm not going to get too crossed up on like what exactly it is that Capybara is looking for. I know it can be that ID. If I wanted to nest my names of params, I could say name equals, and then I could say article, bracket, title. The bracket means that we will have params nest the title key within a hash, and the hash key will be article. So you'll be able to say like params bracket article bracket title if you want to get this value later on. And if you want to get all of the article parameters, we'll just be able to say params bracket article and get everything that starts with article bracket out of this form all at once. We'll show that on the controller side too. This is going to be similar for a second input. This will be content. And let's take a look at how the form actually looks on the page while we're doing this. Because if I'm just thinking about passing tests, like the yay we made it, I don't need that at all. That doesn't need to be there. This also, like, since I hadn't put that in a tag, like it didn't put it on the page where I expected it to. If you don't put tags on the first thing in your HTML document, like your browser doesn't always know how to interpret that. So I might say here like new article. Why? Not for the test, right? But just to remember the habits that I'm going to actually want as I'm building apps. I should be telling users at all times what they should do. For example, here, like, Capybara knows what title and content are, right? But no human user is going to be able to intuit that just by looking at these two fields. So at bare minimum, I should have something like this, right? Just so that a person can make their way through. And right now, the person I'm thinking about is myself, right? I need to be able to get on here and mimic Capybara if it does something that I don't predict. Cool. So at bare minimum, I think that if I'm trying to put like code to pass tests, I should have something to remind me that like there's not just tests to be passed, there's actual apps to be used. Let's put in a submit input. Type equals submit. I'm going to give it a value just to practice that. Value will be create article. Cool. Let's refresh. What's going to happen when I fill in title with something? Rah. The content. Like a Dungeon Dragon cheerleader. Cool. I think it's technically R-A-G-H if it's just a dragon. I don't know how you actually spell rah, the way that Busta says it. I clicked on create article and nothing at all seemed to happen, right? As a matter of fact, like, the URL did change, so something did happen. What happened was we traveled to this exact same page because the form didn't have a destination on it yet. Since it had no action and it had no method, what happened was we made a new GET request to our current location. That's why the URL still said articles new. And then we have here a query string starting with this question mark. Oops, not lookup, my bad. And then we say article bracket title closing bracket equals rah. And then a second key value pair. Article, opening bracket, content, closing bracket equals. So this is just all the form inputs, right? But instead of going in params through a post request, since we accidentally sent our form in the wrong direction, it made a GET request and popped them up in the URL. I want to highlight this because when your URL looks really weird like this, it's almost invariably because your form didn't act the way that you expected to. And that goes for like Sinatra and Rails in this context. I think that people will see this again, which is why I wanted to pause on that. But let's talk about where this form should probably go. And I want to stress here that Sinatra ActiveRecord CRUD does not actually care, right? All they care about is when you click, is the output that an article is created and that the most recent article is what I just filled in, right? That's all it literally cares about right now. That means that we get a lot of freedom in where we send this form. We could choose any action and method that we want to, but what method and action should we use? We should make a post, so the method should be post, I agree. And what should our action be? What URL should we post to if we're trying to follow the REST conventions for naming our routes? Articles. Why articles and not articles new? Pardon? Yeah, articles new is kind of already implied because we're doing a post. post expresses our intent to add something to a database somewhere. And articles tells us a little bit more about our intent, that the database table that we'd like to add to is going to be the table articles. And so when we submit this form, that's the change that we'll expect to happen. This is the RESTful name for an object creation route. The pattern is always post/objects plural. And if we had like any sort of nesting going on, right? Like if we're putting an article under category number 4, you might see something like categories / whatever some category ID is, right? You might see something like this if you look at examples on Stack Overflow and the person's got more nesting than you. But this is a similar thing, right? This would just ensure that the new article getting created will belong to this specific category. But we're not nesting these articles. We've only got one model. So keeping it nice and simple, we just use the model name plural. And the way that I think of this is we are adding to the collection of articles that already exists. And that's kind of how I remember it in my head so that it feels like the intent is expressed in the syntax. Really important to try to stick to these conventions as much as possible. Starting tomorrow, Rails will assume if you're making a form to post an article, that is exactly the URL in action, and that eventually you're going to be doing something called creating on the other side, right? So if this was the new step, then we need to create a create step to catch this form. Get / not get, it's a post. We just said that in the form. / articles do and I don't need to render an ERB here. I'm gonna need to like create an article, so let me do a binding.pry here, and I want to take a look at like what these things do when we get there. So I'm gonna do the rah like a Dungeon Dragon cheerleader again. Why not? Create article. Did we hit our binding.pry? Oh, we didn't hit a binding.pry. What happened? Why didn't it go there? Wait, I'm looking at the URL. The URL still hadn't changed, y'all. What happened? What's different here? I changed my HTML, didn't I? New.erb. Yeah, this should be post articles. Let me examine my page. Inspect. Form method post action articles. Oh, wait, look. Now it's frozen. Interesting. Why is it frozen now? Why did we hit the pry session now and not the first time? I'll tell you why. I didn't refresh the page before the first time, right? So I edited the ERB code that the server would respond with the next time a request was made when I went into new.erb. But until I actually clicked on the form submit, or if I had refreshed the page, I had not made a new request and gotten a new response with the new HTML yet. So I was still submitting the form to make the GET request. And that's why we see all these GET requests. Get. It's just me clicking on that same form and then it just returning the cached thing that the browser had awareness of. And eventually the cache updated and it gave us the new thing. And so now we're in post articles. In any case, let's look at our params. Because in our form in the new.erb, we wrote article bracket title, now title lives inside of a subhash accessible at the key article. And also, the same is true for content, right? So if we say params article, that should give us exactly what we would need if we wanted to like create a new article. Just the keys and values by themselves, no sort of nesting or decoration, right? What if I had tried to call article new with just params? We'd run into this. A couple of y'all run into this in the last couple of days. Unknown attribute, object for object. Really confusing error message if you're trying to understand it just by reading the sentence. But what's happened now, if we take a look at this, is that by just passing in params, you could think of every key name when you call article.new. You could think of every key name that you pass in as an accessor method that you're trying to call, right? So if I pass in params article, then I'm saying this new article dot title equals rah. This new article dot content equals like a Dungeon Dragon cheerleader. And because in our schema, the article migration contains title and content, that means that we can call title equals and content equals. We can't call dot article equals, right? But that's what it's trying to do if we pass in just params. The first thing we see is that article is this stuff, and then we're going to go, oh, self.article equals, and then it says, oh, wait, I can't call self.article equals, and we get that error. So if it hasn't clicked in yet for you yet with ActiveRecord, don't don't be too worried, because it literally took me a few weeks after graduating my boot camp for it to click in for me. But when you're creating objects that inherit from active record base, it's actually less helpful to think about instance variables than it is to think about accessor methods. And I know that when we started creating objects, we were always making instance variables in initialize, but we could have also made accessors and said self.accessor method equals the argument. Self.accessor2 equals the argument 2. We just didn't do it that way because we wanted to be connected with where the data actually lived. What's happening under the hood here is that these objects initialize only using accessors, and they call accessors based on the keys in the hash that they're given. So anyways, that'll be really helpful later on too when we get into Rails stuff as well. So that's another reason I wanted to kind of pause on that. We have the syntax that we need, article.new params article, right? And if we use that syntax here in our controller, it should give us everything that we need to create our article. Is .new going to do the whole trick, or do I need to add a step? Yeah, we got to save it, right? So I could either make this a variable and then call .save, but right now I'm not really worrying about error handling, so I'm just going to do it all in one step and say article.create. I predict that this is going to still fail our learn test because we're not handling like a redirect, but aside from that, I think that we're going to be okay. Let's do a fail fest. Are we able to create our article? Yeah, so creating an article worked there, and I knew it would, right? Because we had just checked it out in Pry with the exact same syntax. Expected articles 3 and got to articles. So what's happening now is that we haven't done a redirect, so the URL that we're at still corresponds to the post articles, right? We need to redirect to that exact article. Well, you know what? Now I kind of feel like a variable would have made more sense. Why? Because I need to redirect somewhere. So let's do that. I'll say article equals article.new, and then I'll say article.save to make it clear that there's a difference between the object world and the database world, right? And then we'll do a redirect to the, let's see, /articles, and then we could add an interpolation for whatever the ID of this article was now that we've saved it to the database. Cool, let's try that out. Run the test. Oh no, articles 3, no slash. I forgot something. That's fine. The test works, right? I'm getting another thing now where it talks about, oh wait, no, it doesn't work. Still doesn't redirect. Expect page body to include some content. Expected, I don't even know what's happening here. Text, CSS, body, text align, center, do, quote, hello world. Interesting. CLES, oh, it's just a ... here. So let's look at this failing test. I think that this is one that can really stymie you and kind of make you just run away from the code. Because, like, personally, to me, if I saw a string like this, I would not expect that my brain is actually going to be able to parse the rest of the error. Show of hands, does anybody else honestly get that assumption when they look at a code like this ever? Just kind of like walk away from it, go back to the code. I see that some of you are raising the hands inside of your hearts as well, and I appreciate that limited amount of vulnerability and bravery, but I do think that we do this a lot, right? Here's what I think about when I look at this now, after hours and hours of missing this, is that the format that we get when we get an expect page body to include, page.body is another capybara thing. It's building a virtual version of the page that it's visiting after the redirect. So we've created like a redirect to the right place. Now it's arrived somewhere, and it wants to make sure that the content of the article that was just created is showing up at article's ID based on the ID of the article that was just created. And instead, it's seeing something else. The format is we see expected, and then it tells us what we gave it, which is weird. You'd think it would say expected and then say the expectation. But the reason it's flipped is because the overall sentence is expected X to include Y, where Y is the thing that would make them say, yeah, and X is the thing that I gave them, right? So they expected this thing that I gave them to include this specific piece of content. So if I do dig into this thing that I gave them, there's a diff below, right? The diff is showing that what's missing, what's in the minus, is the content that they want to include. And what's there instead, and here maybe it's a little bit easier to see what's kind of here. Can somebody tell me what kind of page we're actually at right now, just by looking at the capybara output? Very good. It's the error page. It's the Sinatra doesn't know this ditty. This is another reminder that like we didn't actually go and create this stuff like in the browser. We were doing a lot of tests over and over, and I kind of did that on purpose because I wanted us to reckon with what happens when we get off the browser for too long. That eventually we still have to read stuff that's in the browser, but we just have to do it through test output now, which is a little harder. So let's go and see it here so it becomes really clear what we're making. Part 2. Ra Boogaloo. Create article. Beep beep beep. Sinatra doesn't know this ditty. Yep, sure enough, just like what it showed back here, right? And why doesn't it know the ditty? Because we have an article show page. If we refer back to the README, this was alluded to as something that we needed to get done. We're at the point now that we've moved past create, and we're starting to get into the read. It corresponds to two different actions, show and index, and what it's telling us is that it's time to build our show route. But I think the really important takeaway here is that whether or not we have a browser, it's still possible to slow down and read one of these test outputs at a time and think about exactly what the browser must be doing through that lens of Capybara. And even though that is technically possible, it is still best to do our app testing right in the browser so that we can, as humans, understand where the code is failing and not just rely on other code to tell us how our code is failing. We can get two kind of pieces of feedback at once now. So this is crucial to my workflow and why I keep touching on it. I think it's going to help in your project work today and also over the weekend if you adopt some piece of that practice. So we don't want to go to articles 1. We need to parameterize this route. That means that we need to have like colon somewhere in the route to say like there's a wild card, right? So let's make a show for one article. We'll do a get because we're going to see some stuff there. We'll get articles slash, and then I think ID is the good conventional word because we're going to refer to the ID of one article. We don't even have to say article ID because we just said articles slash. That's kind of implicit, right? If we get articles ID, that means that params ID is going to contain the ID of the article that we need. How do I use params ID in conjunction with an ActiveRecord method to locate one particular article? Very good. We could say article dot find params ID. That's going to give us a certain article. Let's set it to an instance variable. I didn't need an instance variable in the route right above, did I? Right? The post route, I didn't need an instance variable. Why? All I did from the post route was redirect. There was no ERB file rendered at that route, so I didn't need to communicate that scope, right, that gets over to that file. Over here, I am expecting to call on an ERB. I'm expecting to say ERB, symbol version of a string, articles. That's the other thing with the file lookup, you don't actually start with a slash. So this is why Sinatra is hard, right? Because up here we have to do the leading slash because that's a route thing. But down here it's like a relative file path from our views folder, so we don't lead with a slash. Very confusing at first to learn. We'll say articles. No, it's not going to be ERB articles. Yeah, it will be. Articles is the folder it's in, and what we're doing is a show action. Yeah, that feels about right. So we would need to have a view in here called show. Show.erb. We'll just do another h1 in here. And within it, we'll say hello, an article called, and then we'll maybe do an interpolation just to see if we have the instance variable. I want to make sure that I embed with rendering, because if I leave the equal sign out, let's actually watch this fail for a second. Article.title. And then we'll end it with an exclamation point so we'll know when the title is done. Hello, an article called whatever the title of this article is. Great. Let's try going here now. So we found an article, right? We didn't have an error on article.find. We go to article show. We have the show page here, but without the equal sign, of course, we're not able to see the real title of the article. It didn't make an error, though, so I feel like there is a title there. It just didn't show it. Yeah, cool. An article called Rah Rah. Delightful. And then we could say down here, like as a p tag, oops, totally wrong snippet shorthand on this one. Cool. P tag, we'll say like content is, then we can say article content at article.content. And as a human being, I feel like this is kind of what I had expected a show page, which is why I'm just playing with it now in the browser to make sure that I've got it all here. And then I can kind of turn to the test and see like, okay, what does the test need from me here? Content is that. Okay, let's see what the test needs. RSpec fail fast. Oh, look at that. That actually solved all of the things that it wanted on that show page. So like simply by using the show page kind of in its conventional way to literally show everything about that object, I'm guessing that the test was probably looking for some combination of title and content to be on the page. Yeah, it expects that the body would include content. That did finish that test. That was the last thing to check. So it just wanted to make sure that the content that we had filled in ended up on that article page. They didn't explicitly even test for the presence of a title there, but I do feel like as a human being, we've built the kind of show page that I'd want to like maintain going forward because it tells me enough. So read action. Index action responds with a 200 status code. So this is talking about like that response code stuff, right? We're getting a 404 just as a review. What does 404 mean? Pardon? I thought I heard somebody say something. Beg pardon? I didn't catch that.
Someone said error.
Error. Yeah, what kind of error? Whose error? Whose mistake is a 404? Is it the user's mistake or is it our mistake?
It's our mistake.
Yeah, I'd say that ultimately everything that we make in an app where a user can't go somewhere might come down to our mistake. Technically, if somebody gets a 404, what it means is that the resource doesn't exist here. So sometimes it means that we forgot to create a resource or put it there, but sometimes it means that the user is either being prohibited from accessing it and getting redirected to a 404. That's kind of like what GitHub does to obscure whether there is a resource at a given URL or not, security through obscurity. But oftentimes, like, if I was trying to go to, like, snails.com and I went to snalls.com because I forgot the I because of my keyboard, then it might do a 404 because maybe there is no snalls.com. Right now, it's expecting a 200, meaning like when we go to /articles, it wants to get an OK response. But instead, we get a 404. Actually, that kind of means more of a user error thing in the context of what we're talking about here, right? We're saying, hey, user, it's your job to try a different URL because there's nothing here. Obviously, we're going to fix that in a second, but I'm contrasting a 404 error in this case with like a 500 error. A 500 error is the kind of error that comes back when like your Sinatra controller actually breaks. If I were to put like a syntax error in, let me actually see if I can change a 404 to a 500 by making a route where there is something, but then breaking that route. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to change this into an index action. We're going to do /articles. And I know that when we are going to index our articles, we're going to have like articles equals article.all. And maybe I want to like test this, but I make a mistake as I'm testing it. Oh dear. So I say like puts at articles bracket 0, right? And then I render ERB index, or in this case, we'll do it nested inside of articles, so it'll be articles/index. The problem here is on line 14, I've mistyped the variable name. I'm wondering if I run this test, if it's going to still come back with a 404 error. I don't think it's going to be a 404 anymore, because we do have /articles now. But yeah, now we have a 500 error. Anytime that you're running a test, and it says it expected a 200 and got a 500, or it expected HTML and it got a 500 error, this is never going to tell you the whole truth of what broke in your application. If I go up and scroll up, like I can clear this, I can run this again, tell me everything you can about what happened with this 500, it's not saying anything, right? It just says expected 200 got 500. And then in here, I can see that like AR CRUD Lab spec line 44 is where that failed. But if I go and chase that down, that just says expect the response status. It doesn't tell me anything. This is probably where a test is the least helpful compared to doing stuff in the browser. Because in the browser here, I can just go to articles, try to reach it, and then right here, the 500 error, the way that Sinatra works, actually ships something to my browser for me to see what's wrong. I can see exactly why there's a 500 error coming back. I can look down here, by the way, and I can see information about like the request and the response that happened. I'm not sure if there's a 500 displayed anywhere in that. No, it's just a random thing in a hash. So they don't say 500 error specifically here. But this does tell me the truth of my code in a way that Capybara could not, right? So I go to my controller, I fix the thing that I was doing wrong, puts articles 0. Beg pardon. Now I try to run back to the index. No such file or directory, index.erb. Okay, so that's right. I still need to create the index.erb to display these articles. And if I run this now, do I still get a 500 error? Like not having a file, same problem as having a syntax error, right? So when you see 500 anywhere, whether that shows up in later on in JavaScript, it tells you there's a 500 error, go back to your server, look at your shotgun output. In Rails, you see a 500 error come back in like a lab, go back to your shotgun output, go back to your actual app, run it in the browser. If you can't see an error in the browser, back to the shotgun, like seeing what went wrong there. Because that same error that was in the browser, by the way, it's up here in the shotgun. It had to be here first, right, to be able to get to the browser. Cool. So that's my like meditation on good debugging practice. But let's proceed. Articles index. Let's make one. New file. Index.erb. Now, if I'm trying to really flex and remember like how indexes have been conventionally working in the past, they tend to generally like name the thing that's being listed, like just as a human helpful thing. Maybe we're also setting some sort of brand. Oh, our articles. See, now we're creating a parasocial relationship with our users. Really, really good for engagement. And then we're going to iterate through our articles. So we need to embed .each do article. Close up our embed. Do another one down here. Oops. And we will do an end. And then for each article, we tend to like list stuff. I'm going to actually make a list to talk about this. Like we have these UL and LI tags. There's also OL. UL is unordered list. OL is ordered list. So like, let me do an OL so we can see like numbers. We're going to like list these articles with like little numbers next to them. So we're going to have an ordered list. We only have one ordered list element. And then within that, we have some number of list item elements. So for each article, I'm going to create a list item. And that list item is going to contain the thing that we need for the article. So we'll have an LI that opens and an LI that closes. And then within this, anything that we want to say about the article. I think that another thing about the index is that we generally have links to the show page on the index. Like that's part of what a job of an index is like not just to tell me everything that's there, but to give me a means to navigate to it. That means that I'll need an anchor tag that points to the show route for a specific article. Can somebody tell me what the pattern for the article show route is, just from memory? I heard /articles. /:ID. Now, if I put :ID here, where is this link going to want to take me? Is it going to take me to the like link of this particular article, or is it going to take me somewhere else? Very good. Yeah, I have to interpolate the ID. So if I want the user here to see like the article title as the thing that they can click on in their link, then I similarly need to like get the article's specific ID interpolated. Otherwise, every single link that lists out is going to literally go to :ID at the end, and that doesn't really map to an article's ID. It's going to say like undefined article with ID :ID, and we don't want that. Cool. So let's see what it looks like on the page. If we go to articles, do we have an index? We do. Shows our article that we've created, and we're in an ordered list, so now we have like one rah. Hey, we're on an index page, and I mentioned like having links around our app. Now that I'm browsing, I might want to like add an article to the list, and I know that that feature works. So I'm going to make another link here just to create a new article. I'm just going to borrow the anchor tag that I already have. Instead of going to articles with an ID, we're going to go to articles new, and instead of displaying an article title, I'll just say create new. Just flesh out this list a little bit more. Create new article. Title. Notice that lists have their own indentation rules too. That's kind of like inset from the create link. That'll help with like CSS stuff later on to be aware of that. World. Hello. There we go. Feel as wise as Yoda writing in that style. Cool. So now that I've created an article, we're here. Oh, here's another thing, a missing link that I'm going to pop into the app just as I'm like building it out. Let me make it like a back home link. This will just go to articles, and we'll say back home. Because it would be a tragedy to write enough code to pass all the tests in this lab and then actually run the application and realize that no human being that you know would tolerate the application in the state that you gave it to them, right? It's not a minimum viable product if it's only viable to some test that some other programmer wrote. It needs to be viable to a human being. Now I feel like we've actually got to flow through our application. Yay. Cool. Create. We've got it created. We have a link back home. We can go and look at our list. Cool. Where are we at test-wise right now? I don't know. I feel like we fleshed out an index page just by kind of playing in the code itself, which felt kind of good. Oh, and that seems to have handled like 5 tests. Would you look at that? It displays all the articles. The show action has a 200 status code. The show action, oh, this is specifically making sure that title and content show up on the show page. So by just attempting to like think about these REST conventions and what patterns we've already been doing in terms of what gets created, I think that helps me to put things there that anticipate what the test stuff is. We've also got like more tests to go in terms of like the update action and such. And I think that it's probably helpful to go through the update action if we have time in this room and if people are still interested. Is that the case? I thought I saw a nod and a shrug, but honestly, you're taking up about 7 pixels collectively. Pardon?
Several shrugs, like, yeah.
Sure. Let's take a look. I'm just going to fly through this like as I would do it. So if I'm doing this update action, it's saying it wants a 200. It has a 404. I remember that means I didn't create the route. I remember where my controller routes are at. I need to create an update action. I think about how the actual create action went, and that involved new and create. So maybe I set my table by saying I'm going to have an edit step and I'm going to have an update step. Every time I'm creating or updating, it's 2 steps. Edit will be a get route to show the form. The format is going to be /articles/edit. But also we need to know which specific article we're editing. So we need to refer to that ID in the route, right? And when we're finally updating our article, we also need to refer to the article by ID. But we don't need to say edit because the verb that we'll use is going to be put or patch. And that means that we will be able to imply that we're updating the article with that ID, just using the conventional RESTful naming. Here we're going to have an ERB display, similar to how we've displayed the ERB form for new, but instead of new, we're going to call it edit. I think one difference is that we're going to want to show the user information about the existing article. So just like what we did when we showed one article, we could find the article by using what's in params ID. So now articles edit, I think, is going to be very similar to articles new in terms of the form and in terms of like the message. So I'm going to use that as kind of like a crib note for what I've got. I'll say edit.erb. The difference between edit and new is that I care a lot more at this point about like the value attributes of these 2 inputs. So here I'll say edit article. And where it says title here, where it says name article title, that's still going to be the key name that I want to use for passing in the attributes, ditto for content. But I want to talk about the value attribute because value will let me fill the field with something. And what I'd like to fill the field with is the existing article's title. Because I just took the trouble of finding it in the controller, so I might as well use it in this input. I think I've also lost my closing bracket on the input. I can tell because content went gray right below. And now by adding that closing bracket, everything seems like it's okay again. So I'm going to take this value and reapply it down here, but for the article's content. We could scope this in the browser just to make sure that I'm not getting too far away from my own understanding of how the code works on the screen. Because I cannot code this mod well without knowing that stuff. Articles to edit. Oh no, this is no good. Title is empty. Content is empty. I didn't expect that at all, right? We have @article.title, @article.content. What have I forgotten? I've forgotten to render these values again. I don't have the equal signs. Ugh. That happens, right? Either I didn't get the article, or I did get it, but my syntax was bad, or I got it and my syntax was good, but I hadn't like refreshed the form from some previous state. There's always a bunch of things to check. But now I have world hello for articles 2 edit. Articles 1 edit gives me rah rah part 2, rah rah boogaloo. Fix this. Maybe throw a couple more A's in there so we can like, yeah, we'll capitalize them both too. It's kind of loud when you did it. The year was 1988. Cool. So there's an article called Rah Rah, content is Dungeon Dragon. I feel pretty good about that. Did that actually work? Rah Rah? No, it didn't. Part 2, rah rah boogaloo. So what just happened? Rah rah. Oh, interesting. Content is draft. I created a new article. Why? Because I just clicked on stuff, right? And I did just copy paste this in. The only thing that I had changed was edit, and I had changed this to article title, article content, but I still have a new article form because my post articles is still there, right? I'm still just pointing it at the original controller action. Here I need to interpolate the ID now, because we said that we're going to do a patch request to articles and then whatever the article ID is. Since we're going to do that, and we know that patch requests are not natively supported, we need to add a hidden input. The hidden input, in order to do the Sinatra method override hack, which is literally called a hack in the documentation, because the internet works great and was made on purpose, value equals the thing I want to use. That's the thing we just kind of know by rote eventually when you do it enough times. It's input type hidden name method with an underscore and then value of whatever thing you really want to do. So now I think we're going to get an error when we try to submit a form like this instead of a success. Let's go to try to edit this. Articles 4. You know what? I should probably hook up the show page to an edit while I'm here. I'm just going to make a quick link again. Another href. I'm going to call it edit this. I'm going to interpolate an article ID in here. Use the format that we've already built for that route. Because as I go, when I'm personally coding, I'm adding these links almost thoughtlessly, because I want to get to the point that it is literally thoughtless and it's always like just muscle memory. So now I'm here, I'm on edit article. If I inspect the form this time around, it should be pointing to a different route now. But wait, it doesn't. Form method post, action articles, input hidden, name method value patch. What have I forgotten? Let's go and look at this form again. Edit.erb, method post, articles slash, I did it again. I forgot an equal sign, y'all. Let's refresh. Now it wants to go there. Articles 4. I leave out equal signs in my embeds. It happens. I'm cool with it. I'm going to put exclamation points at this and see if that's enough. Do I want it to say create article? I do not. I want it to say update article. Let's see what happens when we click. Okay. It says articles 4 in the URL. It doesn't say edit anymore. That's a sign to me that we might have actually gotten to our patch route. We can check and see on the back end to be sure. Shotgun always tells us the truth. We totally did. We got to patch articles 4, and that tells me that I'm ready to kind of bring it all home and wrap up this last controller action for now. So patch articles ID do. I need to say, like, what is the article that I'm going to be updating? We need to find that. We need to update the article according to kind of the same stuff we did up here. We used params article, right? We've got the same nested naming, article bracket title, article bracket content. So therefore, params article syntax should work for like updating our article. Couple of different things though. We're not making a new article anymore. And we don't have a new local variable. We have an existing variable. So we need to call like .update. We could do that. But maybe I do want to like think about error handling later on, and I'd prefer to break it up into 2 steps, like new and save. I'd like to be able to say like at article.save later on and have it mean something. But right now with this syntax, it's a meaningless redundant save because update is already calling save under the hood, right? So here I'm going to instead say assign attributes. That's the update version of new. We'll assign the attributes, we'll save the article, and then I think we should redirect back to the article show page like we did when we posted the article, just to kind of follow the convention that we'd already established earlier. Redirect to the articles, and now article is not a local variable because we did get it to set it. Article.find, article assign attributes. I'm wondering though, did this need to be an instance variable, or am I just following the pattern from something I copy-pasted? I'm not rendering anything in this route at all. I don't think it's going to matter whether it's an instance variable or not, but I'm going to mark that, and I'm going to see if we can do the least amount of code required. So we'll say plus bang, bang, bang on the Dungeon Dragon. We click update article, and then cool, the bang, bang, bang is there. We can take them back off. And before we hit the controller route, let's edit it, take out these instance variables because I'm not rendering anything, so I don't technically need them. And I think that that's going to bear out here. Sweet. We've tamed the dragon once again. And essentially, if I run my test now, is it going to tell me that I'm like good at editing things? I don't know. I kind of just got into the browser there because I feel like I do my best work when I have that direct feedback. But yeah, we went from like 8 examples to 14 examples. That handled update just fine. Delete's only responding green with a 200 code because that Sinatra doesn't know this ditty returns with a 200 code. So that would be the further work that I'd have to do. But the secret of all this is that once you can do creating and editing and showing, all of the steps that you need to do deleting are right there. And so I would leave that up to y'all to continue practice as we go into lab work today. There's going to be time to work as a pair on today's Sinatra playlister lab. I think that there will be ample time. I would recommend staying focused on that lab specifically because it's going to gauge your readiness to move into Rails stuff and to only like back into doing earlier labs if you realize that you're so stuck on playlister and you try to get help and it's not working, and then you realize, oh, we both have these 3 or 4 labs that cover the same kind of stuff. Maybe you end up pairing on that stuff then. But hopefully by like happy hour time this afternoon, people will feel pretty solid on these conventions in terms of how routes need to be named, what work needs to happen at each route, how to embed things in views, how to kind of think through these steps, not just forwards, but also backwards, like going from a controller back to the view that made the request to the controller, if you run into an error, just to check that side of things too. All of these kind of proficiencies are going to be somewhat incomplete and somewhat shaky right now, but the goal is just to get good enough at recognizing these patterns that when Rails picks up the baton tomorrow and starts acting on these same patterns, it's not going to feel like a brand new framework. It's just going to feel like an extension of what we've been doing in Sinatra. It's very possible that a Sinatra app is only just an app.rb file, but right now, this file structure that you've been learning all week is identical to a Rails file structure. So a lot of that is going to feel very familiar. Your main task today is to pair up, talk through what you understand and what you don't, and to review on these Sinatra basics to make sure that you understand what's going on under the hood of Rails when that shows up tomorrow. Starting tomorrow, we won't really care about Sinatra anymore. Spoiler alert. So today is like the day to really put a cap on everything that we've learned and ask those questions about what's going on if you've still got them. Right now, do we have any questions before we dig in?
I do have a question about that hidden input field, that hidden input field.
Yes.
I need to understand how that works while using it.
Sure. So here's my thoughts on the hidden input fields. I'm going to write them up here. So we could think of like params comes in is just a hash, right? And maybe it has like title is like such and such, YOLO. We had like article params. It's this nested hash, title YOLO. Sure. And then we've also got other parameters in here other than article. Any sort of other param can get added here, so it could be like commit sometimes is a param that you see, and commit would be like whatever the button said, so like update article. And then what we also are doing here in this edit, when we say input type hidden name underscore method value patch, is we're adding this cat key value pair. Underscore method equals patch. With that there, we can see that like we've literally changed what's in our params hash based on adding this hidden input to the form. This params hash gets read by Sinatra when a controller route starts happening. So before any of these controller routes even get touched, there is a middleware going on. That's literally what rack is. Like when Shotgun goes here and says like what it's processing, it's looking and it's processing like this request and it's looking at any parameters, right? It's before it decides that we're doing a patch to articles 4 and like kicks that off, it has to decide based on parameters what kind of request to make. It's only going to pause and make that decision if there's something going on called method override. So method override is something that is optional in Sinatra. When it happens, before we even hit any route, we have to pause and look at the params hash to see if there's an underscore method. Just say underscore method. Yeah. They say, like I said, in the docs, they do say it's a hack. So in this application, we have method override set to true somewhere. Let's see. Method, oh no, not in here. Let's see where it's set. Method override. No results. Oh no. It might be a default in this setup for this application. And in any case, the method override hack, the way it works, the actual HTTP method is overridden by Sinatra by looking at the value of the method parameter in the body of a post request. This hack is used to make post requests look like other request methods like put or delete. It's only needed in shitty environments like HTML form submission that do not support the full range of HTTP methods. So I wasn't the only one telling you that the internet's a little shitty. Sinatra believes it too. They say shit, like, what other kind of environments do we have? This is our first web development situation. Like, I didn't know I was in a shitty environment. I mean, JavaScript requests get to use the full range of HTTP verbs. That's the other kind of thing they're talking about. But if you've worked in JavaScript for long enough, like, there's certain shitty things over there that you notice too. But basically, this inserts a rack method override component into the pipeline. This hack reads the value of what's going on. Sorry, I lost my files. Where's my README at? There it is. It looks for this value in here. If it sees that there's a key in the params hash underscore method, which we provided with our hidden input, and we made this input hidden, by the way, because if we made it like a text input, we'd be letting the user decide like what part of our controller to hit, and that seems very dangerous. I don't want to trust my user to even tell me their first name without parameterizing that for a SQL query. Thanks, Mama Tables. I'm definitely not going to let them tell me what kind of HTTP verb they're going to use to arbitrarily submit my form. So I make it a hidden input so the user can't change it. I name it underscore method because the Sinatra documentation tells me that that is the key that's looked for. And then I provide the value that I want to be overridden. And then under the hood, the method hack takes care of it because it's anticipating that not every web browser even knows that it's possible for a form to have a method of patch or a method of delete. And it's kind of doing some glue work in there in the middle. Does that help clarify or answer the question around the hidden input, like kind of why we have this necessity here in this form when we're doing an edit or a delete request?
Hey, dude, the method override is in config.rd.
Is it in config? Thank you. I didn't even catch it.
There's a lab where I have to put that in.
There it is. Yep. Use rack method override. Oh, I see. So yeah, I was trying to do the snake case, but it was camel case. That's why I couldn't find it. I did a command shift F, by the way, which lets you search your entire. There it is. Use rack method override. With command shift F, you can search your entire file base for a term. So if I want to see like everywhere I said the word article, I can do that here too. 161 times. Great. That's what I was trying to do before with my search. Thank you for locating exactly where we're using method override. Yeah, if I commented this line out, my edit form would stop working. We could actually test that real quick. We had 14, I think, last time we checked. Yep. Now we're down to 10. And what's the nature of it? It didn't edit, right? We didn't actually hit the right route. It probably went and either created an article or like did some sort of error. But in any case, like without method override, we couldn't get to the patch the way that we just did. Now we turn method override back on. We go from 10 back up to 14. Thank you very much for adding that. Any other questions regarding that, editing, setting up controllers? Oh, refactoring. I think that's the only other thing that I wanted to kind of hint at is like if I did want to go about creating another named controller, I could do that here. I could say articles controller .rb. It would be class articles controller. And I'm going to have this inherit from application controller. Why? Because application controller already has all of the config settings that I want, including like where the public folder and the views folder is. And then I should be able to take all of this code and move it over into the articles controller. But this still might not be enough, by the way. Just moving this over and having the inheritance set up probably won't do the trick. If we go and run our tests, let's fail fast. We're going to have more failures, right? We went all the way back on our code. We've basically broken our entire app. This is where panic sets in. People are like, I can just have one controller. I can't have multiple controllers. I only missed one tiny step. It's config.ru. Where it says run application controller, down here right before running application controller, we can say to use our articles controller. Now let's see how that works. Yeah, just had to call on it by name in config.ru. You mentioning the rack method override helped me remember like why we have this step here as well. But yeah, if I wanted to use multiple controllers, that's as simple as the refactor is. I just need to break off another file, make sure that it inherits from my main controller. This, by the way, is also a Rails pattern that we're going to see. And then I can have all of my article-related routes in here. And also, the other advantage is, what if I had broken off a method to reduce repetition on lines 29, 23, and 35? Then I don't need to overload my application controller with methods that are just about finding articles. I could put those methods in an articles controller too. And then as my app gets bigger and more complex, it's easier for me to find where things are and not get lost. Other questions? All right, with that, there's plenty of daylight to put a little bow on Sinatra today. Please do throw questions and any helpful resources, documentation, diagrams, etc. that you happen upon into the Slack to make sure that other people are catching on with the cool stuff that you're catching on to. Thanks a lot, y'all.